Ask not what VR can do for you, but what you can do for VR. That's the best way I can summarize this generation of consumer-grade VR experiences. It still feels too early for this stuff. Now, don't get me wrong, I recently got my HTC Vive and I was blown away like everyone else when I first put it on, but it's a $1,000 hole in my pocket currently, and unfortunately, the VR spending doesn't end with the headset. Whether it be through time or money, you're always going to be spending something. I really see this thing as an additional accessory next to your enthusiast grade PC that you took years to build or you've planned out and you've spent like lots of money on it because you use it all the time and you spend several grand on it. Not because you needed to run the VR, but because that's what you like to do, because you like to build PCs, because you're an enthusiast. And that's why I don't see this thing next to these pre-built PCs that they're saying are Oculus ready. It feels almost misleading in a way. This is consumer version 1, and yet it feels like a very much an enthusiast product. You know, there are obviously consumer-grade products that are mainly for a certain demographic or a certain crowd of people, but they're advertising it as if it's ready for mass consumption or for everyone, and it's like so easy to do. And while the setup process is time-consuming, it's nothing too painful, and the headset is remarkable. It has amazing hardware. The controllers that it comes with, the wireless ones, have great detection and great haptic feedback. The Vive is a money-hungry, space-destroying, energy-draining demon of a... You're going to need a lot of space for this thing if you want to do the wandering around gameplay segments like you're seeing in these videos up here. You're going to need 1.5 by 2 meters of room space, and you're going to need sensors on opposite sides of each other to track full 360-degree movement. Now, if you're doing this in an office environment in either the standing or the sitting styles, which you have the option to do, you really only need one sensor, but you still won't have 360 degrees of movement, so there will be some dead zones. But for games where it's simple head tracking, first-person perspective, very minimal movement, you'll probably be fine. You're also going to need to update the controller firmware and the headset firmware. Now, unfortunately, this is all competing with a $200 cheaper and less of a hassle to set up headset, the Oculus Rift. The $600 headset from Facebook, unfortunately, a lot of the speculation about whether or not Facebook would run the product into the ground, well, it's kind of coming to fruition. Oculus Home puts up some spyware on your computer whenever you launch it and uploads a lot of data to Facebook's servers. It comes with a lot of unnecessary peripherals that could have been just separate instead of part of the full package, such as the Xbox One controller and stereo headphones on the side of the headset. And even though the Oculus Rift is a sitting down kind of headset where you're just more stationary, the Oculus Touch peripherals are still not out yet, and they're not going to be, included free with the thing. You're going to have to buy them separately. Unfortunately, for the Vive, we have this problem where a lot of the launch titles are kind of lackluster, and there's very few good ones. And that's a huge problem because, you're now in this catch-22 situation where people aren't buying the headset because there's no games, but there are no games being made because no one owns the headset. It's a little weird spending $800 for a piece of hardware that you're not going to be using that much. But the hardware itself is great, at least for the Vive. I can honestly say that this is not a gimmick. This is here to stay. It's just that right now we're going to be going through a hardship in the next couple of months, and we're going to just have to see where it goes. And, by the time they come out with all these really great titles, they'll probably have a new headset. So I feel like consumer version 1 is a bit pointless for the many people interested in VR, myself included. Let's back up for a bit, though. Although this video is more about the experience and the future of VR, I want to talk a little bit about the headset and what it really means for VR in general. Because this is one of the best pieces of VR equipment I've ever seen. Since I was a little boy, I've always been to, all kinds of places that show these VR tech demos. They've been getting better over the years, but, obviously you can't fit one of these giant things in your home, and even at the arcades, they're still very limited, and they're also huge. But now we have a very small, comparatively, piece of equipment that can be enjoyed by the consumer for under $1,000. And what's great about this piece is that it eliminates so many of the problems that people, myself included, have been having with VR for years. Comfort-wise, this thing is in a league of its own. It's actually a comfy headset, despite the fact that I do have some issues, but one of the things what you can do is you can adjust the lenses very specifically, so you can have them at a distance between each other, you can have them adjusted so you have a larger FOV, and while I do say that the cone of vision is a little bit low, it looks like you're kind of staring through a circle, it is a lot better as you get adjusted to it, and all of this, I have glasses on, and I can still wear the headset fairly comfortably, even though I do think the glasses are pushed a little bit too hard on my face, but I don't get eye strain, I don't get nauseous, and I don't feel a lot of discomfort depending on the angle I have the headset at and how I have the strap on. There's 3 straps on the headset. One is over your head, and one is to the side of, each side of your head. And it overall is fairly comfy, again, considering that it's quite heavy on your face. It weighs 555 grams without the cables. Going back a bit, I'd like to talk about the games once again. Unfortunately, there's a lack of demos on Steam. It's very unfortunate that these guys are not putting out demos, because people have this risk when they're already buying the headset, and you might say, like, well, you're spending $800, so you obviously have some extra money to spend. Yeah, but some of these games can start to add up, especially they feel like tech demos in a way. Like, I've seen some games that are almost $40 or $30, and they're early access, they don't have a lot of content, and they can be completed within under an hour in some cases. We don't accept that for games that are coming out now for that price. Why are we accepting that for VR? It seems like there's this stigmatism where people want VR to succeed, so they won't give negative reviews or they won't bash a game, and they're like, oh yeah, it's great, it shows the potential, but this is a released product. These are released games, and they're charging money for them. I understand early access is a business model like that, but it offers so little for the content, and it is, again, a very huge problem for developers as well, because you have the situation where, again, not a lot of people have this headset, and you're marketing to a very small portion of people, and I think one of the biggest hurdles with developing a game for VR is that you have to have a mechanically interesting game, but also so that it can be replayed more and more, but also you have to have well-detailed environments so that the player can be immersed in, depending on what kind of game you're making. So you need to have a lot of attention to detail in these environments, which players can blitz through within, like, under an hour. And then you have to have the game mechanically strong, which can take a lot of effort, and it's a huge part of the coding factor. Just tons of man-hours in, like, the art department and the coding department. It's a lot of effort. And then, at the end of it, you have to have a decent product that people will find enjoyable, or something that'll last. And right now, there aren't many of those. I'll cover some in the next coming weeks, some of the games that I've been playing, including some free ones. But overall, that's the biggest hurdle with the Vive and VR in general, is that you need to have mechanically strong, interesting-looking games. And it's just so time-consuming for just a small market of people. And you're going to have to price them accordingly, and a lot of people don't want to pay that price. It's kind of sad, and especially multiplayer-only VR games are really going to struggle because, again, incredibly small player base to begin with. It's the reason why a lot of indie developers have gone to Oculus, because they are paying for exclusivity. They are paying to support this very small niche market, and I don't blame those developers for taking that opportunity, because honestly, who else is going to fund it? Valve's not funding them, at least they're not doing it enough, and you need to get software out for these headsets. The only problem is, of course, paying for exclusivity for a peripheral is so stupid, especially considering that we have to deal with, like, third-party software in order to actually play these things. These are actually all playable on the HTC Vive for the most part, a lot of these games, through the Revive software, but Oculus recently tried to patch out and use DRM to make it so that you cannot use the Revive software, so it's like our headset only. It's a really sad situation, unfortunately, because Oculus as a whole is bad for the VR industry, but it's the only one right now that has the most amount of games, and it's got a bigger install base too, so they're going to continue to get more games, and they're going to continue to prosper until something changes in favor of the Vive. Again, the HTC Vive is a demon of a headset. It'll consume a lot of things, your time, your money, and your resources, and sometimes I feel like I did waste the money, but for some of the experiences I got out of it, for the reactions on my friends' faces for trying it out, sometimes it feels like it was all worth it, that I got an experience that you really couldn't buy up until just this year. And I guess, in a nutshell, I'm recommending this thing, but only to the very dedicated, the hardcorest of, if that's a word, the most enthusiastic of people for VR. Even someone like me, who was following the Oculus Rift for 4 years. I still don't think I got my money's worth out of it, but you really can't see it from a value standpoint, can you? No, you have to look into it and say, well, this is for the future of VR, but I want to get into something early. I can't wait. I want to try this out now. I want to see this new level of technology. And if you're an enthusiast and you have some monies to spend, you have some time to set it up every now and then, go for it, man. It's a great piece of equipment, but for everyone else, I would wait for either the second or third consumer version, or let's at least look into what Oculus is going to be doing later on.